Okay, good afternoon. We're beginning our fifth class on the book of Daniel. We're beginning chapter 3. And up until now, we've been focusing on Daniel and his experience in the court of Nebuchadnezzar. And what's interesting today, and probably going to flow over into next week, is in chapter 3, which is a very important chapter of the book. Daniel doesn't appear. His name is not mentioned. We don't see him. And it's a good question as to if this book is about him, why is he not? Why is he left out of what happens here? Which is a pretty amazing and powerful story. Of course, the easy answer, as we're going to see, is that a lot of his contemporaries are involved in the story. Specifically, Nebuchadnezzar, who is the king that he's been dealing with and serving under, but also his colleagues, his friends, the other Jewish people in the king's court, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So we're going to talk about each of those. We're going to talk about those people as we go along. So let's see what we have to say. If you remember where we left off last time, we saw that Daniel was now a member of the king's court. And as a result of being a part of the king's court, he was called in to interpret a dream. And he had to figure out both what the dream was and what it meant. And the dream was a dream about a statue that had various different levels to it: gold, silver, bronze, iron, and that the rock destroyed it. And this was a sign that although Nebuchadnezzar was powerful and strong today, that eventually another kingdom and another kingdom would come, and that eventually Hashem would just take over all. So that was where we stood last week, and that allows us to kind of get some context for this week. And here we go. So it says like this: King Nebuchadnezzar made a statue of gold, 60 cubits high and 6 cubits broad. He set it up in the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. So Nebuchadnezzar makes, after seeing a statue in the dream of different types of metal, here he makes a statue of his own, but it's incredibly tall, right? It is 60 cubits high, right? And a cubit is basically what we would say 1.5 feet. So you're talking about 90 feet tall and 6 cubits broad. So you're talking about 9 feet wide, right? So a tremendous statue, 90 feet tall and 9 feet in width. So, I mean, a 90-foot statue, we could do a quick Google search, right? How tall is the Statue of Liberty? Probably taller than that. I'm going to look it up 1 second. Right, so the Statue of Liberty says it's, let's see. Look at that. 300 feet, 90 meters. So it's actually, I know, 1 second. No. From the feet to the top of the head is 110 feet, right? 110 feet. So almost similar size, right? You're talking about a statue made, but of gold. Right? And the statue is made of gold, almost the size of the Statue of Liberty from the feet, not including the pedestal. Right? When you look at the Statue of Liberty, it's high because it's on a little bit of a mound, and then there's a pedestal and so on. But just counting the actual body of the Statue of Liberty, pretty similar size, right? Pretty similar size. And he makes this statue out of gold. Okay. Now, but we'll come back to why he does this. It doesn't really say. And it says, King Nebuchadnezzar then sent word to gather the satraps, prefects, governors, counselors, treasurers, judges, officers, and all the provincial officials to attend the dedication of the statue that King Nebuchadnezzar sets up. So, like they say, all the king's horses and all the king's men. So Nebuchadnezzar brings all these various different types of officials. He makes a big ceremony, a big program at the, shall we say, the unveiling or the institution or the inauguration of this tremendous, again, 90-foot tall golden statue. Tremendous. I mean, if you think about that, it's just amazing how big it would be. So the satraps, prefects, governors, counselors, treasurers, judges, officers, and all the provincial office officials assembled for the dedication of the statue that King Nebuchadnezzar set up, and stood before the statue that Nebuchadnezzar set up. Okay, so they come, right, and they're around for the statue. The herald proclaimed in a loud voice, "You are commanded, O peoples and nations of every language, when you hear the sound of the horn, pipe, zither, lyre, psaltery, bagpipe, and all other types of instruments, to fall down and worship the statue of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up." Now, this statue of gold isn't just, now we're seeing the purpose of the statue. It's not just for beauty, but actually Nebuchadnezzar at set times wants people to worship the statue, to bow down to the statue. And he says, listen, whenever you hear the music playing, and it lists a whole different, a whole list of different types of instruments, but when you hear the music play, then it's time to stop what you're doing and bow down to the statue. Right? That's the message that King Nebuchadnezzar sends out to his people. Whoever will not, now, okay, very nice. So you say, everyone has to pay attention. Okay, but now, of course, as anyone that ever has to deal with rules says, well, what if I don't, right? A rule is not a rule unless there's some kind of consequence. It's just a suggestion, right? So is this a suggestion or is this a rule? Well, we're going to see. It says, whoever will not fall down and worship shall at once be thrown into a burning fiery furnace. Well, if you don't keep the rule, right, then there's a very severe consequence. The consequence is punishable by death, and a very painful one at that. A person is going to be thrown into a burning fiery furnace. Right, so Nebuchadnezzar is pretty serious about this. It says, and so as soon as all the people heard the sound of the horn, the pipe, the zither, the lyre, the psaltery, and all other types of instruments, all peoples and nations of every language fell down and worshiped the statue of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar set up. So because Nebuchadnezzar is got a reputation for being serious about what he says and what he does, when the music starts playing, everyone starts bowing down, because presumably he's got the furnace ready. Presumably he's got soldiers and people that will follow his command. And if you don't follow what he says, he's going to throw you into the fire. So therefore, says the Tanakh, everyone listened, everyone followed, because no one wants to be thrown into a fire. If it means stopping what I'm doing and bowing down to a statue, it's better than being thrown into a fire. Okay, so let's stop here before we go further, because this story is going to take a turn. But before we get to it, what do we understand about what we've seen so far? Right, that's the first. This is a good point to stop and analyze what we've seen. We see that Nebuchadnezzar set up this big statue, right? And we have to ask ourselves why. Right, now we see why, because he didn't just set it up for people to look at and say, ooh, that's beautiful. He set it up because he wanted people to bow down to it at whatever time the music plays. And presumably he had control over that. So the question is, why do that? Right? What's the purpose of setting up this statue for people to bow down to? What's the point? And I think the answer is pretty clear, right? Especially given what we saw in last week's class, where we saw that in his dream, Nebuchadnezzar saw a statue, and the statue had different parts to it, but a part that represented him. Right? And what was that part that represented him? The golden head. Right? The golden head at the top of the statue was representative of Nebuchadnezzar. And what's different here is that instead of the statue being the statue that he sees in his dream, it's a different type of statue. the statue is completely gold. And it seems like what Nebuchadnezzar is trying to do is to change the destiny of the dream. What we saw last week was that Nebuchadnezzar had the dream, and the dream told him, you're not going to be king forever. And when Daniel tells him this, he's very appreciative that Daniel tells him, and he even recognizes Hashem's hand in doing so, which seems like, oh wow, that's pretty cool. That's pretty good of you, Nebuchadnezzar. But now we're seeing that Nebuchadnezzar doesn't really accept it so easily. He's not okay with just, oh, well, Hashem said I'm not going to be the king forever, so okay, what can I do? No, he's a very powerful guy, and he says, hey, I'm going to do something about this. And basically, he does two things about it. Number one, he takes the dream, right? So in using the dream, he's going to try and beat the dream, right? Because the dream says you're not going to last forever. And what does he do? Instead of a statue that has different pieces to it, now it's one big piece, right? It's all gold, as opposed to the previous statue, which was gold, but then silver, then bronze, then iron. And the silver and the bronze and the iron represented successors to Nebuchadnezzar. And only the gold on top only the head was gold. Now the whole statue is gold. And that's a way of saying, and I'm here to stay, right? So by having the statue be completely of gold, it's like Nebuchadnezzar doesn't accept the possibility of silver, bronze, and iron. It's just going to be me. It's just going to be gold. And what does he do? He has everyone bow to the statue, right? It's now by everyone bowing to the statue, it means everyone agrees you, Nebuchadnezzar, are the one. You are the powerful one. You are the guy. You're going to last forever. Whatever you say, we're going to do, right? And that's his way of showing that the dream that he had, it's not going to last. It's not correct. And rather, he's going to last. He's going to overpower it. So he thinks. Of course, we know that when Hashem has plans, it doesn't work the way that you think. Right? It works the way that Hashem thinks. But Nebuchadnezzar, like many other people of power, they can't appreciate that. He can't appreciate that. He thinks he controls his own destiny completely, and he thinks that all the power that he does have will protect him, will allow him, right? And what makes him think this? Well, there's lots of things in the story that show you, yeah, he's drunk on his power. So what are some of those things? So number one, just the fact that he could build a 90-foot tall statue. Right? Who can build a statue of gold that it's 90 feet tall? There's not so many people in the history of the world that could do that. So the fact that he does that shows you how much power he has and he could show, right? So that's a big part of it. But not only that, look at the way he goes about it, right? It's not just that he builds this giant statue, but rather he builds the statue and then he says, and everyone's got to come see it, right? And by saying everyone has got to come see it, it shows his power. Right? When he says, I'm calling you to come to the inauguration of the statue, and they all have to come, and they all look around and say, oh, we're all here, right? So what does that basically show? It shows his power. It shows his strength. And if you were paying attention to the Pesukim emphasize that, right? Because what do they show? They show, oh, look at this. He brought this officer and that officer and the other type of officer and the other type of officer and the other type of officer. So in showing the grandiose scale of the way he does things with the statue in height and with the large group of powerful people that he invites and that listen to him, that shows something. And not only that, he has everyone bow down, right? So that also shows his strength. And how does he have them bow down? With the music, right? And the music is another sign of his strength and power, because he doesn't have like one little flute playing, right? But he's got a whole orchestra. He's got a whole bunch of different people that are all sorts of music playing in order to make this work. So by doing that, that also shows his power and his strength. And the last thing that I would say in terms of showing his power and his strength, and is who does he have to beat in his dream, right? he has to beat. Does he have to beat the silver? Does he have to beat the bronze? Does he have to beat the metal, the iron? Yes and no, right? Meaning Daniel told him, listen, the silver is going to one day come after you, and the bronze is going to one day come after you, and the iron is going to one day come after you. But it was none of those things did damage, and he still was the gold, and he still was on top. But the damage came from the rock, and the rock, of course, symbolized Hashem. So his real concern at the end of the day is Hashem, and he has to overcome Hashem. So how do you overcome Hashem? Well, the way that he does it is by creating Avodah Zarah, and by saying, hey, everyone has to bow to me. And if everyone bows to him, then what they've basically done, or his statue, is they've taken out the respect of Hashem, especially if you could get the Jewish people to bow to him. If you could get the Jewish people to bow to him, then he knows that Hashem and Hashem's dominion over the world, we could keep it at bay. It's not going to happen, because if the Jewish people are bowing down to Avodah Zarah, then Hashem is not going to show his strength, is not going to show his might. He's not going to help them out because they're doing Avodah Zarah, so why should he help them? So in fact, Nebuchadnezzar is actually being pretty smart here, because he's protecting himself. How? Partly by showing his strength, right? And that's very overt and very out in the open. But partly by getting Hashem's, quote, weakness out there. And what's Hashem's weakness? Hashem's weakness is if Bnei Israel will worship the idol, then Hashem's not going to stand up for them. Hashem's not going to protect them. Hashem's not going to rebuild the Beit HaMikdash. Hashem's not going to do good things for the Jewish people. And then that will, at least Nebuchadnezzar is thinking, prolong his strength and prolong his ability to be the king. So we get the sense of why Nebuchadnezzar is doing all that he's doing here. And that is, like every other person of power, right? He wants to hold on. He doesn't want to let go, right? And even, and not being, I'm not even going to be critical here, right? But we see it even in our own time today, this week, right? The president is being told, the president of the United States is being told, listen, someone else is going to be the president. Right, wrong, whatever, it doesn't matter. But someone's telling him that, right? And how's he responding? He's not happy. He's not, I'm not leaving, right? He's we could argue the right way, the wrong way, he's being cheated. It's not my point. My point is, when someone has power, right, and they say, okay, it's time to let go of the power, it doesn't work. They're never happy about it. Right, and that's a president, right? That's someone who knows that eventually, if not 4 years, 8 years, you got to let it go, right? But a king never lets it go, right? A king never wants to say it's over, because the king says, "I live forever," right? And as we know about other kings, right, that they viewed themselves as gods. They didn't even think they were going to die, and even when they died, they thought they were going to create things like pyramids and statues and other things that they're going to live well beyond whatever life that they live. That's how people of power think, and people who have absolute power think it absolutely. So that's a big part of what was going on here. I'll add one other thing that I think is significant to tie into what we're talking about here, and that is there's another. We've been trying to connect this to other stories in the Tanakh, and this definitely connects to another story in the Tanakh, at least two that I could think of. But one is the story that is the Migdal Bavel, right? The Migdal Bavel, the Tower of Bavel. What's the point, right? It's built to create a name. It's built to create this lasting, and although you don't see it so clearly in the pasuk, it's built in Bavel, which, by the way, where's Nebuchadnezzar? He's Melech Bavel, right? So you see they have the same type of thinking, even though it's not the same time period. Migdal Bavel was much earlier, right? But what was the thought? The thought was that I'm going to create something that's going to provide me with immortality. I'm going to last forever. Even though it's not clear in the Pesukim, our rabbis who understand the Migdal Bavel story, many of them say that it's the same idea, and they learn from this story the purpose of the Migdal Bavel story. So I think that's significant, and something that we point out is that this happened in Bavel just like Migdal Bavel, and it's the same basic idea, the idea of trying to hang on to power and to hang on to control and to never let it go. And that's really one of the key messages that we have here. Of course, we look at it and we scoff at it, we laugh at it, we say, you don't understand. You could build all the gold statues you want. You could build all the towers to however high you want to build them. To Hashem, that's nothing. When Hashem's ready, he'll take care of business, right? We know that, but it's hard for the person in power to see that. And the message for us might be, in terms of when we're in situations of control and power, don't make the mistake. Don't think that you're going to hold on to your power, right? Your power comes from Hashem. And if he chooses to take it away from you, he can and he will, right? And if you remember last week, we said that the whole point of Hashem giving the dream to Nebuchadnezzar is to tell him, listen, I put you here. I gave you this power. Now, what is that supposed to do? That's supposed to humble Nebuchadnezzar. He's supposed to say, thank you, Hashem, and I appreciate my place in the world, and I'm appreciative that I have the power that I have. But Nebuchadnezzar, like so many other people who have the power, didn't appreciate and was not, maybe he was appreciative, but he didn't appreciate that it was going to come to an end. He tries to end it. And this is an important lesson for us about the nature of power, and that power has its limits, the source of any power is from Hashem, and the limits will always be, there'll always be limits, because if for no other reason, Hashem exists, and therefore you can't have unlimited power. So I think that's a huge part of what we have in the story that we're reading this morning. Now we're ready to turn to the next part of the story, which is going back to the point that I said before, which is that that part of Nebuchadnezzar's plan is to get Jewish people to bow to this too. And if the Jewish people will bow to it, then he's kind of found a way to beat Hashem, because if the Jewish people will bow to it, then Hashem can't really, but won't really stand up for the Jewish people. So, so what happens? What do the Jews do, right? So far, it sounds like all the nations followed along. They all followed suit. Well, if all the nations followed suit, then that means the Jewish people followed suit as well. And this is very similar to what we say, or at least how the rabbis understand the beginning of Megillat Esther, right? Where there's this big party, and it says all the nations came. Even though it doesn't say expressly that the Jewish people came, the rabbis of the Talmud understand that, no, they came. And that was why Haman was allowed to ascend. Haman was allowed to rise, was because the Jewish people were bowing to Ahasuerus. We'll get to that. So let's see what happens here. Did the Jewish people bow or not, and so on. So the Pasuk says the following thing. So I'm in Pasuk 8 now in the book of Daniel. Seizing the occasion, certain Kasdim, Chaldeans, they interpret it in English, but certain people from Babylonia or soldiers of Babylonia came forward to slander the Jews. They spoke up and said to King Nebuchadnezzar, O king, live forever. You, O king, gave an order that everyone who hears the horn, the pipe, the zither, the lyre, the psaltery, the bagpipes, and all types of instruments must fall down and worship the golden statue. As we said, once the music plays, everyone's got to bow down. They're reminding the king that this is what he said. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be thrown into a burning fiery furnace. And as we said, if you don't bow down, the king said the consequences are very severe. Death penalty, punishable by fire. There are certain Jews who you appointed to administer the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men pay no heed to you, O king. They do not serve your God or worship the statue of gold that you have set up. So we're hearing from these troublemakers, we'll call them, some Babylonian soldiers saying, hey, at least 3 Jews, but 3 prominent Jews, because these are Daniel's friends, his colleagues, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. That was their Jewish name. And here we're hearing their Babylonian name because that's the way that Nebuchadnezzar would refer to them. And the Kasdim say, hey, these guys are not bowing to your statue. Right? And this should definitely resonate with us because this is something that we see elsewhere as well, where Jewish people within the court are being targeted by other people in the court saying, hey, you're not complying with the rule. Right? And where is the case that this happens? With Haman. Right? With Haman, we know the story, right? We all know the story, that Haman says that everyone has to bow to him. Right? He gets Ahashverosh to say, to make a decree that everyone has to bow to Haman. And Mordechai does not. What's interesting is, if you follow the Megillah carefully, it makes a point of saying that people went to Haman and say to him, hey, Mordechai is not bowing down to you. And then Haman gets angry. We always remember that Haman gets angry. But what's interesting to note is that in the story of Esther, it makes a point of saying that there were tattletales, there were snitches, there were people that told Haman to instigate, to bother him, to make him upset, and then he would take the action on Mordechai, and then we all know how that played out. So it's interesting. The same thing happens here, right? The same thing happens here where, and this is actually chronologically a little bit earlier, but the same thing happens here where the Kasdim are not happy, for whatever reason, that these 3 Judeans, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, are high up in the king's court. So in order to get at them, they say, hey, these guys ain't following the rules. Nebuchadnezzar, did you know they weren't following the rules? I think you have to throw them into the fire. Right? And it's interesting because we don't see that Nebuchadnezzar on his own sees this. Perhaps he was going to let it go. We don't know. But he couldn't let it go now because now he is being told by the Kasdim that this is what's happening. So we need to see another important lesson here, which is that often it's the instigators, the initiators, the troublemakers who create the problem. Because the king made a rule, and the rule is a bad rule for the Jewish people. But rules, it's not so, sometimes rules are made and they're not always so carefully kept, and okay, that'll work, it's fine. But when is it a problem? It's a problem when the other people come along and say, hey, look at this. This is a problem. And the truth is, we know today is just so happens to be the anniversary of Kristallnacht and what is effectively the beginning of the Holocaust. And one of the things we know about the Holocaust is that it wasn't just that Hitler was a bad guy or that he had some soldiers, right? What made Hitler successful was that no one stopped him and that no one stood up to him, and actually the opposite, right? We see on Kristallnacht that many people used his approach against the Jewish people, and they took out their qualms, their issues, their problems on the Jews. And that's a message about Jews living in a foreign society as well, which is that we have to beware of the fact, not only of the leadership, but also of the peers, of the surroundings, of the other people. And if they work against us, it's much more dangerous than just the king. The king can have a fiery furnace and he can throw people into a fiery furnace, and that's bad. But he's not going to do it on his own because he won't know who did and didn't do the law. He's one person. He has a few police officers. Okay, there's only so much they could do. But when the people start turning on other people, that's when you run into a problem. And that's a big lesson here as well. The lesson of the challenge will come to the Jews in a society when our peers turn against us. When the other members of the society turn against us, that's a big problem. How we deal with that and what we do, well, there's lots of different possibilities and lots of different answers. We don't find it here in the Tanakh, at least not in this place. But I think it does identify for us a big challenge, and that is the challenge of, hey, when the goyim around us, I'm not talking about above us, I'm talking about around us, when they are out to get us, that's a big problem. It might even be a bigger problem than when the above us is out to get us. So it's something that we really have to be cognizant of and careful of. Anyway, I'm going to stop here for today because we're going to see next week what is the reaction of these Jews, right? These Jews didn't bow down, or at least it seems like they didn't bow down to the statue. We have to see, why didn't they bow down? What's their response when they're caught? What does Nebuchadnezzar do? All that is going to be our topic for next week. Next week, we're going to see the response of the Jewish people to what happened when the king catches them not bowing to his idol. Okay, so that's what we're going to stop today. Any questions, any thoughts, any comments, feel free.
Could you send me the class? Because I came in late.
Yeah, where should I send it to? I have your address.
floraltowel@gmail.com.
I sent you something before, right?
Yes, I listen to them every morning.
Great, okay, I will send it to you.
Thank you.
No problem.